short. It's very to the point. It's a great sort of summary of about 100 years of intellectual history on academic freedom, and it offers alternative proposals that everybody should in university life, and also in legislatures that control our lives to some extent, should take really seriously. So thank you for that, Mark, and thank you for this book, Julia. Thank you all for coming. The lecture is free, but the books are going to cost you about $200. Sorry about that. The table is very burdened. Okay, we're going to have a conversation in the academic sense in which we both give talks to you, and then I hope we'll have enough time to exchange and then also bring you into it at the end of it. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to read through something because it will, in fact, be faster. So, as you know, academic freedom is in the news, but it is constantly getting confused with free speech, as Marco mentioned at the top of his introduction. The basic idea of academic freedom, as opposed to free speech, is that experts get the last word on the truth or falsity of plausibility or implausibility of a statement. So this is because they know the knowledge base and laypersons don't. So we can all have our non-expert opinions, but that's different from having authority to control the outcome of the systems that we're having the opinions about. So for example, take a really humble, kind of simple one. As a citizen, I like red fire trucks. But a fire department has tested colors and decided that they get better visibility from people that they're driving through with their sirens from white trucks, or from that sort of sick-looking lime yellow, or from the disturbing orange that they use in Berlin, Germany. So color experts in the fire department, whose job it is to drive fire trucks to fires, go with the orange. As a non-expert, I may grumble, but I defer to them. So that the color knowledge likely originated, upstream in academic research. And academic freedom is the thing that protects academic research, in this case, on color visibility, from non-experts like me, offering our 2 cents and derailing the research before it really gets started. In other words, the idea is that non-experts don't routinely override expert judgments and wrongly say things like, red on fire trucks is easier for me to see than day glow orange, in areas where having correct knowledge is really important. So, over the last many years, some parties have tried to redefine colleges and universities as public squares. They aren't centers, in this view, of discovering and teaching what's true and false, probable and improbable, so that you constantly have to make a distinction between those things, collaboratively and in an ongoing process. But they are instead universities, that is, public spaces covered by the First Amendment. So under the First Amendment, everyone's opinion is equal. That is, it has an equal right to be expressed. It doesn't have to pass a truth test to have the right to utterance. So, for example, I could give a talk outside this building and then be invited on to television to state that Warren Buffett, a known registered Democrat, favors slave labor for children from Latin America and has secretly persuaded Democratic Party leaders to admit thousands of refugee children to work for free in the companies in which Berkshire Hathaway invests, boosting their profits and his wealth. So that's why Democrats favor open borders. I can't be arrested for calling Buffett the child slavery king, and can be endlessly quoted on Twitter and elsewhere without the citers being sanctioned for repeating my utterance that Buffett is the child slavery king. It's false speech, but it's public square protected speech under the First Amendment. However, if I teach the political science department's course on the introduction to American politics and explain that support for child slavery is one reason why Democratic national leadership is so bad, I'm making a false statement in an academic context, the classroom, in which the standard is true versus false, or at least plausible versus implausible. So knowing that I have no evidence or logical argument demonstrating that Buffett is the child slavery king, the professional expertise of my colleagues authorizes them to remove me from teaching that course and perhaps remove me from teaching altogether. The academic freedom protects my colleagues' professional judgment and the action that they take against me as a result of that judgment. My academic freedom does not, in fact, authorize me to make fact-free statements in an educational setting where fact-free is defined by the profession that I belong to's established knowledge base and expert judgment. Academic freedom doesn't protect my free speech. It protects the truth discovery processes that are part of teaching and research. So my colleagues that do use evidence and argument in a professional way, grounded in poli-sci, centuries-old history of research, debate, refinement, and revision of these ideas regarding their object of study, political life, can teach without interference from their department chair, dean, president, board of trustees, governor, local business people, or anyone else in the society. Universities as professional workplaces operate with academic freedom, not First Amendment say whatever you want rights. Okay, so enter Julia, whose argument takes off from this distinction, and it's actually very clearly articulated in the book. So first, she notes that the recent defense of academic freedom has focused on making this distinction in a context where it's often getting obliterated between academic freedom and First Amendment free speech, as I was just describing it. So she cites Joan Scott, Hank Reichman, Robert Post, and other authorities that have been trying to carve out this distinction for public consumption for a number of years. And they build on what we might call the American Association of University Professors theory, or AAUP theory, that goes back to the period before World War I. This is not a new issue. So in this context, or in this theory, which universities have basically accepted over many decades, truth standards are regulated by the professional community, it's not an individual right, through a process of peer review, which is collective or collaborative. This continuous collaborative review requires tenure, another element, to prevent silencing through firing or non-renewal, which the famous example was the wife of Leland Stanford, who founded Stanford University, firing an economics professor because she didn't like his pro-labor union stance. It had nothing to do with his professional competence, it had to do with his opinion. And he was gone, and that was one of the stimuluses for this long effort to develop a theory of why you couldn't just arbitrarily throw people out because you didn't like them, or rather their ideas. So there's the other piece of this is that this higher standard of employment protection that we call tenure, meaning you can be fired for just cause such as embezzlement or sexual harassment through an institutional procedure in which the administration and also your colleagues participate, is justified. It is this higher standard because the knowledge and learning it produces are public goods. There is an epistemological claim here, which is that the public good of true knowledge is corrupted if non-experts can interfere with the professional process through which knowledge is produced. We, the public, are said to benefit materially from the job security of our academic peers. And there's a kind of a deep thought here which is harder to grasp in the United States than in some other cultures, which is that it's not as efficient as we sometimes assume for bosses to have the right just to fire people because they don't think they're good. It's actually efficient in this model to protect people from that kind of firing, because what is being protected is a longer and slower process of idea development or collaboration that the person in charge may not, in fact, correctly understand because they're not part of it. Even that's a bit off our territory today, but it's something that's lurking behind here. Okay, so the elements of academic freedom are thus collective professional practice, peer review as a form of self-regulation, which also has a kind of a democratic undertone to it, tenure, and then all these things for something that we've come to call the public good. Again, it's not an individual right that's constitutionally protected by the First Amendment. It's a different kind of thing, even though speech is almost invariably involved in the enactment of academic freedom. Okay, so Julia, I think you were on the same page completely with all this, and you do a better job than I just did in explaining what this distinction, how this works. Okay, so, but that's not the main part of Julia's argument. What she then goes on to say, and this is kind of the second main theme, is that the conditions of academic freedom have been hollowed out, if not wholly destroyed, by the arrival of this thing that we call neoliberalism, neoliberal capitalism. And the one sentence that description of neoliberalism I think is most relevant here is that it is a focus relentlessly on pecuniary or monetary returns on investments, meaning that something like accurate knowledge is very much secondary to that primary goal of ROI, return on investment. So as promotion decisions and also funding, reward, grant getting, as people describe an award that they got in terms of the monetary amount instead of what the actual topic of the research is, which is increasingly common in people's tweeting out of the awards that they've gotten, etc. As attention is paid to the dollar amount of startup companies that are started by a particular unit or patenting revenue that an institution produces, the idea of truth as the main thing that comes out of research, basic research that's really for more research and not for monetary benefit on the outside, gets less relevant as a mode of judgment of the quality of academic activity and promotion and the allocation of resources. Julia also points out that tenure has become a minority protection. Basically, most university instructors teach off the tenure track on one-year contracts, and they can be fired simply by not being renewed. And the percentage is basically 3/4 of college instructors across the country. Of the 4,300 institutions of higher education in the U.S., 2,800 of them operate with 0 tenure track faculty. So the lesson from that is, well, you can teach college without tenure. What difference does it make? And that's basically the drift. And as Julia rightly points out, this basically destroys one of the pillars of academic freedom as traditionally understood, which is that people can be protected from dismissal or non-renewal because of how they're teaching or how they're doing research. And then another issue that I think is really astutely observed in this book is that most faculty also have started to see academic freedom as an individual right, and kind of within this neoliberal frame of your development of your human capital being protected by academic freedom, not the intellectual capital of, say, your entire discipline or all of your colleagues in the unit or of your university as a whole, so that academic freedom conceptually and psychologically is not functioning as a form of professional self-governance collaboratively understood. It's just my right for you not to criticize that I just got a big grant from a funder that is a known front for a tobacco company. And then finally, another issue that's sort of this hollowing out of academic freedom is that the public is not familiar with this concept, generally speaking. Everybody that works knows, corporate employment and at-will firing. Like, I'm just tired of how you're doing your job, you're gone. But not so much with the idea that there's just cause employment in the world in which you have to go through a process that your peers also participate in, if not actually control. So, long story short, there's little awareness of what academic freedom is, and it just seems, as you nicely put it at various points, it's like a special privilege of having done well in school for these people that makes them more protected than everybody else, and why should they get that? What's so special about us that we are able to get this thing compared to somebody that's working at Walmart or for the railroad or for an accountancy office, etc. So all this is true, all this is very well articulated, all of it is very crisply said. So again, it's just, you can really kind of breeze through this book and learn a ton of stuff in not very much time. There's a clarity and directness that is often not part of this conversation. And I'm really pleased that you've gone to the trouble of making it as clear as it is. Okay, but this leaves us, and this is what I want to talk about in the remainder of my time. So what do we do now? So we have this thing, academic freedom, and then it's gotten really weakened. Do we accept that? Do we fight it? What do we do? So I'm going to just crudely bifurcate this into two options, kind of plan A and plan B. Plan A, which is not Julia's, but is the aforementioned scholars of academic freedom, is to try to revitalize the academic freedom ideal, first by distinguishing it from free speech, trying to correct that error that is so common in American media and elsewhere, and then inspire people with the concept of academic freedom as this thing that helped the United States become more democratic and more prosperous, and could continue to do that for more diverse population under very different global circumstances. So there's quotations of some of the great moments in AUP, theorizing the common good depends on the free speech, the free search for truth and its free exposition. It's true in 1940, it's true now. This Plan A also uses unions and other modalities of collective action, including academic senates, including collaborations with students, graduate students, to fight to expand tenure again. And I have to say I've been obsessed with reversing adjunctification myself, because it's just a cancer in the profession, and it weakens the ability of the knowledge base to go forward, not to mention the ability of people to have careers that they deserve to have on the basis of their intellectual labor in graduate school and elsewhere. So I believe I'm not misinterpreting you, and I'll jump in if this is wrong, to say that you don't think this is going to work, this Plan A. And you have a really good historical reason for this, which is that essentially the idealists of academic freedom, and I'm one of them, and you're kind of one of them, but more like the realist that work with each other. Disillusioned. Well, for very good reason. And your point is that universities accepted academic freedom only because they had to, because they couldn't hire enough professors if they didn't. So it was basically a market choice. In other words, it's a kind of just a employment, like an early version of neoliberalism. It's just, okay, I can't get enough of you highly qualified people if I don't offer you tenure. So I'm going to suck it up and offer you tenure. But it doesn't mean that I believe philosophically in all the stuff that was just being said about how there's a connection between truth, a free society, a democratic society, a developmental society, a non-racist society, and giving you tenure. I mean, so now that there are more professors than universities think they need, it's just like, well, I'm not going to give that to you anymore, because I don't have to. I can hire as many. It's been a buyer's market, really, for 50 years in our field. I mean, there's been this employment since basically 1970. There hasn't really been a national strategy to deal with. So we have this situation, and I think that you're right to assume that given current trends, this isn't going to change, and the market is going to continue to militate against academic freedom being anything more than kind of lip service, as opposed to something that really provides material conditions. So this gets to Plan B, or really Plan J for Julia, and that is, let's just drop the public good justification. Most people don't really accept it, including our own colleagues. And let's also drop the idea that the university stands above the debates that are roiling society, that we're a neutral arbiter based on our professional expertise. We're not producing objective knowledge, we're locked in the struggle to produce the best kind of knowledge that we can in conflict and in collaboration with other people that are doing the same. So to quote from the book, to forge a new freedom that will carry us through the neoliberal age, we need to abandon the language of neutral expertise and of work undertaken in service of some vaguely defined public good. Instead, we must proudly proclaim that the university is a profoundly politicized arena in which what exactly might constitute the good and who gets to define it are vigorously argued across and within fields of knowledge in the domain of both research and teaching, end quote. So we say, okay, you all on the media and television and the press, have made the university into a political football that you kick around for entertainment. We are a political battleground, so we're just going to accept this reality, and we're going to fight back on the basis of this thing that has just become a fact of life for our societies, for this society. And then I also just add one other thing that I think is implicit more than something that you really spell out in the book, and that is, I think you also have in mind a process that this would enable, which is deeper engagement of the university with its communities. So that if we aren't trying to protect ourselves by walling ourselves off, we can engage with communities that we have in all cases, been part of the disadvantaging of. Do you understand that? What is the word that I'm looking for? Disadvantaging, that's the word, yes. So, this is a land-grant institution, isn't it? So there's been a study called Land Grab University that identifies the extent to which indigenous lands were taken for the benefit of settlers as part of this settler colonial project. And so a university that is less defensive about its past and less defensive in relation to its communities, conservative, centrist, progressive, racist, anti-racist, college, non-college, can do a better job of engaging with them, and we can getting us to some other better understanding of knowledge for society, if not exactly public good knowledge. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up with a few reactions to this, which are things that I are going to get deeper and start talking with you all. It's really great to have a materialist reading of academic freedom, which is what this is, in which it is explicit in every sense that it depends on employment status, depends on the conditions of non-tenure track or tenure track employment, where non-tenure track employment empties it out. So Julia points out that the lip service version of academic freedom, which allows it to be kind of merged together with free speech, and then take all sorts of pious positions in relation to disruptive students, etc., for the benefit of the media, is essentially attempting to replace an economic guarantee with a political one. And that's exactly right, and it's remarkable how infrequently this is pointed out. I think that it can be the basis for a better sense of what we need to do in order to make some kind of version of academic freedom real for scholarship and for scholars. That's really valuable. I also share Julia's frustration with the liberal faculty frame. Tenured faculty have, over the course of my career, been very disappointing actors and agents. We have not fought for graduate students. We have not fought to extend tenure to, say, writing professors that are often attached to English departments as adjuncts, where the lit people have tenure and the writing instructors do not. And we haven't really said, yay, tenure, I really like having job security, and by the way, you who work in Walmart should have it too. You should have just cause termination, not at-will termination. And we can figure out how to adapt that to everybody's industry, where we are providing a model for safety, security, and dignity for others, rather than seeing ourselves as an exception. And so I think that that's kind of where you're going with this, and I completely agree. Okay, I have some caveats and some suggestions, and I'll end up with some howevers, I guess is how I would put it. Okay, the idea of the university as a political battleground terrifies me, the embracing of it. First, because I think it's going to be unpopular with faculty and students who want a place of safety, security, not the safe space in the snowflake sense that gets bandied about, but just calm conditions for learning and thinking through things over time, where there's a duration that will allow you to get into an issue. You're where you're working 10 or 20 or 30 hours at a paid job just to, afford rent or manage your student debt while you're trying to study. Having some peace and quiet from controversy, I think, is a benefit. And I would like academic freedom-based universities to continue to offer a version of that. Secondly, political battleground might further invite adversaries onto campus and just stir the storm even more than they already do. And then the third caveat about this is it may veil what is really special about the institution and its distinctive practices. You know, we swim in a sea of assertions that float on, you know, emotional intensities and high impact visuals and social media. And so having a place where observation and inference, accurate evidence, and then correct, you know, and kind of scrutinized, carefully detailed arguments, having a place where those things are valued, I think is an enormous value. And I'm sure you don't disagree with that. It feels like that has to be part of the record. And so I guess what I would suggest is that we have a kind of a pinchers movement in which, and I'm interested to know what you would think about this, say, yeah, you've wrecked the conditions of academic freedom, and we also need to fix the conditions of academic freedom. Not define academic freedom as a pious, kind of insulated separateness, which you say, you know, and which I think is completely right, but define it as a form of engagement which nonetheless has procedures that need to be protected. So some things I think we need to hang on to, or need to do. We need to work seriously on reversing neoliberalization of higher education. It's true that it's not like the ship has sailed, you know, the train has left the station. It's more like the fight that we never actually had, because there was one position on this, and there was not a movement based on campuses that ran through students and faculty and staff into the administration and then out into the world. It's what's so bad about all these public cuts. What's so bad about tripling tuition in the space of 10 years? Now, people don't like it, but there hasn't been an articulation of how that violates the conditions of academic freedom that Julia talks about in her book. So, you know, this project would involve this pinchers movement. I think it's just really the elaboration of Julia's Plan B, is to build new material conditions that allow collectively based procedural rigor to exist and to be understood as the academic freedom that the society as a whole needs to preserve. A second thing, an emphasis on the non-monetary or the non-pecuniary benefits of both learning at the undergraduate level and research, also at the undergraduate level, but also at the other levels. This has been mystified as go to college in order to improve your private pecuniary benefit, which is basically a wage. And there are three other types of benefit, both collective pecuniary and two different kinds of non-pecuniary, both individual and social, that the university produces in abundance, and which this fixation on wages as the main benefit has rendered invisible and weakened our cause with the public rather than strengthened it. And then I guess the other thing, and this is where I really converge with Julia, is yes on the idea of the university as a site of wild debate, as a place where knowledge is experienced in the process of being created. Right? So it's life in the sausage factory, which is really messy and is unpleasant and causes conflict and hostility and frustration and anger at times, but which is also sort of connected to, I don't know, like the magic of thinking, the magic of learning how to think, you know, the glory of intellectuality. So I guess I think what I finally got out of your book was also an affect or a feeling about what it's like what it could be like in a less harassed and a less hunkered down university, to be, you know, which is intellectuality as kind of as a practice, as a way of life, as something that people can bring into their workplaces as adults, into their families, back to their families that are suspicious of universities, as, you know, also one of the things that the university has to offer. So it's kind of rigorous professional process, models of democratic collaboration for the people, which would, I believe, make people feel that universities are really on their side. And I think that your book is a major step in that direction.
Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate all these comments. And I can't tell you hopefully say sharing the stage with you and getting to continue to discuss what I think we both agree are really critical issues regarding the fate of the university right now. And you've been leading this discussion for years, and I've read all the books, and I'm really delighted that you've agreed to share your thoughts on my book and found so much of it to be of use. I also do have to give a shout out to Marco because of that weird, strange confluence of sabbaticals, all of the work that he put in. He did nearly solo, and I really appreciate that. And to him and Roll for giving the opportunity to publish this book. It started as a challenge over a beer at our department picnic, and it's one that's been really just invaluable to me. So I want to try to address the two kind of main things that you focused on at the end there of the talking that you're putting some pressure on in terms of the arguments that I embedded Plan B, as you put it. So first, that the case for academic freedom should be made on the grounds that universities advance the common good. And you seem to accept here that a lot of the non-pecuniary benefits that I think you would highlight are things that might fall under that framework, right? A way of just saying the common good. And second, that the primary good that universities produce is public knowledge and public learning, and that this can in some way eventually be shorn of kind of personal and political bias. And you're not saying that outright here, so maybe I'm misunderstanding your critique from the things that I was reading before, but it is something that's been brought up about the book, and so it seems kind of worth being really clear about what I mean when I say that knowledge is political. So I'm actually going to tackle those in reverse order, and politics and knowledge production first, and common good second, in order partially to convey how the book originated beyond the beer, and clarify what conception of politics I believe is at stake here. So at the time that I began writing this book, a new wave of attacks on universities were underway, definitely not the first, surely not the last, but it was a kind of fresh swell of them, and as some of you here will remember vividly, we here at UNL just weathered a particularly vigorous one. And not only were individual faculty members being targeted here and elsewhere, but attempts were being made to undermine academic freedom and delegitimize higher education as a whole. And my fear at that time was that these efforts would escalate and that the traditional lines of defense for academic freedom, that kind of initial layout of how we always defined it, that those were failing. And this fear in some ways has now been realized in Florida and elsewhere. My intention for the book then was to think through why the long-established arguments in favor of academic freedom and higher education as a whole were faltering, and then to explore if more effective answers to these pretty catastrophic assaults could be devised. So as I read the media accounts of the attacks on faculty and the purposes and value of higher education writ large, I noticed the common thread in the rhetoric, namely that particular faculty were being singled out for the ways in which the researcher teaching was quote-unquote political and therefore biased. And this language made clear such work was thereby rendered illegitimate and outside the bounds of what university work was supposed to be. In short, the attacks on the university were grounded in the idea that institutions of higher education produced apolitical, fact-based, unbiased knowledge. In other words, those seeking to erode academic freedom and public support for universities were using a conception of academic knowledge generation that was remarkably similar to that held by many faculty, including many staunch defenders of the university. So indeed, the idea that universities could and should be places where knowledge is produced cleansed of politics has become a leading justification for attempts to limit academic freedom and slash public support. So the trouble was, and is, that it's all too easy for critics to identify academic knowledge production as having a deeply political character. Politics is implicated, whether you're writing and teaching about race and gender in American history, the social relations of capitalist production, the measurement of climate change, or amazingly now, modes of viral transmission. Is this because faculty members are failing in their duties to purge their pursuit of knowledge of the stain of political bias, subjecting students to what critics have called indoctrination? I mean, clearly not, right? It's because the production and transmission of knowledge is essentially political. The view is, of course, grounded more than half a century of scholarship now, which has explicated the ways in which the generation and teaching of knowledge is shaped by material conditions, by social relations, by cultural practices, by ideological formations, and linguistic and narrative structures. Knowledge doesn't emerge cleansed of its conditions of production. It is, as my title proclaims, always dirty. So it should be clear from that description, when I say that research and teaching at the university is political, I'm not talking about politics in a kind of popular, trivial sense of partisan politics, but rather politics in a more profound way. Perhaps the simplest expression of this was offered by the political scientist Howard Laswell when he defined politics as who gets what, when, how much, and why. In the context of the university, this involves issues of who receives the authority and resources to perform research and teaching, on what basis these claims are made and evaluated, what qualifications are needed to teach students or be students, what courses are offered, how are they constructed, and so on. Those of you who are faculty members know that the struggles over such questions constitute a great deal of academic life. What job candidate is chosen, what departments get a tenure line higher and how many, which graduate applicants should be admitted, what courses should be required for our major, what should be included in general education requirements. These questions speak to the value of our community, what we will preserve or foster, and what we will let wither away or cut off from further support. Decisions about the distribution of resources, credit, and authority are fundamentally political and structure knowledge production in every discipline. So what then are the implications for the claims of academic freedom? If, as I contend, the apolitical conception of the university opens us up to attack and makes us vulnerable to continual charges of hypocrisy and violation of academic norms, then recognizing the essentially political character of knowledge production answers and dissolves the force of those charges. But it also does more. It invites researchers and teachers to reflect upon and articulate the political meanings of their scholarship. It allows them openly to discuss the role of their work in constructing healthy, equitable, and just democratic polity as they understand it. And finally, it encourages them to engage in precisely what both Chris and I agree is critically necessary right now, namely to organize and to become militant activists on behalf of researchers, teachers, students, and the broader public. So the question remains, how do we persuade people to support the university, political or otherwise? So Chris noted the familiar, the kind of ready response. So echoing the long-standing position of the American Association of University Professors, or AAUP, the answer is that universities serve the common good. For over 100 years, organizations like AAUP have been at the forefront of developing and articulating these robust defenses of the values of higher ed and what it brings to society, and the necessity of protecting this through employment conditions like tenure, shared governance, and due process. So these arguments are really deeply embedded in the academy, even if they're not really understood outside of it. And I absolutely believe in organizations like the AUP, to the point that I've spent much of my time and energy at UNL reinvigorating a fairly dormant chapter here on campus, serving as president of the Nebraska State Conference and on the National Committee for the College and University Governance. The AUP is a powerful voice for faculty at a time when the protections faculty need to do our work is not only being eroded but aggressively hacked away. And I did want to just take a moment to say that and to give a shout out to all of my AUP colleagues here that I see in the room, and warmly invite those who have not joined us to do so. So such is the strength for the AUP's vision for higher education that the statements they made in 1915 and 1940 still serve as that go-to reference when discussing the value higher education offers to society. And Chris did a nice job of outlining that position, and particularly how they ground the special employment protections offered to faculty, usually known as academic freedom, in what they call the common good. So because the knowledge generated and disseminated by universities benefits the common good or the public good, everyone has an investment in giving them what they need to do this work. So this is probably a familiar phrase, and I acknowledge the power that it still holds. Numerous faculty groups have recently attempted to revive it as a rallying point for defending higher ed and the faculty's role within it. And I was noticing a tweet the other day from a group that's called Faculty for the Common Good. Is that the? So nevertheless, as Chris noted, I've come to think that this is a mistake, and that the language that served professors really well in the first half of the 20th century no longer serves us today. So I first note that the idea of a common good was developed at a time when faculty were largely a homogeneous group of wealthy white Protestant men. It was probably easier to secure potential agreement on what constituted the common good, or imagine that that was possible, when so many concerns and interests were already held in common by the relatively small group of people who defined that concept. Needless to say, such definitions were unlikely to reflect the priorities or needs of the group excluded or marginalized from this subset of the population. Their ideas for what was good for society may have been radically different. And judging from the fiercely fought generations-long, still ongoing battles fought by such groups to secure political rights and social equality, that indeed have quite different perceptions of what constituted the common good, and possibly what the university's role in that might have been. Second, this notion of a universal common good is grounded in a very limited view of the activities of the university. To characterize all of the work performed at modern universities as producing good things for most, much less all people in common is just wildly inaccurate. I mean, anyone with a passing familiarity with higher ed will already know how closely American universities are allied with corporate interests, with the military-industrial complex, with surveillance capitalism, and here at this land-grant institution, as you noted, with colonial expansionist projects, and subsequently with Big Ag, among others. So yeah, universities have produced knowledge that has benefited society, definitely. The new COVID vaccine, in fact, developed with Baylor College support that will be made freely available worldwide rather than sold for exorbitant profits. Springs to mind, it's just a recent example. And of course, some scholars produce insights into the human condition. They reveal the fundamental structures of the universe, or create objects of sublime aesthetic beauty that enrich our cultural lives. But university faculty also helped develop the atom bomb, the basic economic tenets that Chris and I agree are currently undermining higher education, neoliberalism, were articulated and popularized by University of Chicago faculty. So, the list could go on. And to try desperately to shove all of these disparate and contradictory activities under the simple rubric of service to the common good seems both unjustified and, to an increasingly skeptical public, unconvincing. The common good argument fails to come to terms with how partial and double-sided many of the goods provided by universities have been and continue to be. Benefits provided to some individuals or groups have often been a relative detriment to others. So consider the work even at critical race theorists, right, which has engendered such ferocious opposition. Their critique of the law and other institutions damages the interests of those who have an investment in maintaining entrenched racial hierarchies. We may not be sympathetic to that, but that means it's not common. The competing groups simply do not perceive themselves as sharing sufficient common interest to come to an agreement on what would constitute the common good. Even a less blatant example like libraries. I mean, who doesn't think libraries are good, right? They're not good for some people in our society, like booksellers and those who make money off of digital platforms. Those actors are at the moment doing their best to require libraries to pay per use rather than per book, thereby stressing library budgets to the point where they can no longer afford to provide free access to a wide range of materials. This would be a good outcome for those booksellers, if not for most everybody else. So to be clear, I do think that the university does produce a lot of different goods for a lot of different people. But once you admit that we produce a multiplicity of goods, rather than a singular universal good, you have to start asking, for whom is this particular bit of knowledge good? And for whom is it not? And now we're in the realm of the political. That's why we fight over resources internally. We're fighting for who we think is good for our department, or college, or university, or community. When I say that the work of the university is to provide a space for long, rigorous, intellectual, and material political debate, this is what I mean. The same arguments that are made in other forums outside the university, in the media, in the halls of government, and so on, those are also made here, but in a deeper way with longer-term stakes. So some people will claim that acknowledging this point will make us more vulnerable to political attack, and we were speaking briefly ahead the talk about the anxiety that the whole idea tends to produce, is certainly what I shared when we were first batting it around, discussing it with my partner. But I think in the end, the opposite is actually true. It's obvious to everyone that when a university researcher pairs with the CIA and the military, that comes with a politics that will alienate those suspicious of those branches of our government. When a study comes out that's promoted by a university that investigates their state or community's historic involvement in the slave trade, that clearly has a politics that some will find objectionable. When a business school teaches classes based in Chicago School of Economics, or an education program has students reading Paulo Freire's Pedagogia de Press, that comes with a politics. Few are fooled by claims to the contrary. Pretending otherwise just makes us seem hypocritical or insufferably elitist, as if no one outside the university could possibly understand what we're doing. It gives ample space for political actors seeking to attack the university to call it out as political in a bad way, and use it to justify defunding higher ed or eliminating the programs they happen not to like. You notice that getting called political only tends to work in one direction. So, if, on the other hand, we not only admit, but proclaim that universities are also spaces for political debate, and always have been, we disarm those critics, and we empower ourselves, our colleagues, and our allies to engage on what Chris and I agree is, we need to get done, which is that the university in general, and the humanities in particular, are in need of a robust defense. And we agree that faculty and students must be prepared to unite and to fight militantly for the worth of higher education in society. We agree on the need for robust labor protections, not only within the academy, but across society, and that this can provide a point of solidarity between those of us who work within and without the university's walls. We agree on the need for a return to strong state funding for colleges and universities, and free, I think I don't know if you're all the way on this, but definitely in terms of free universal higher education, to reverse that student debt trap and the reliance on tuition for university funding. In short, we agree on the overall problem and what's going to be necessary to fight back, and I think the remaining question for us is strategy. How best do we make our case? And so looking forward to continuing with that now, and with all of you as well.
Yeah.
So maybe what we can do in the last half hour, because we both already sort of spoke for an extended period of time, to open it up from the start to some questions, and that might give you the opportunity and also sort of to weave responses to each other into this. But since we do have undergraduate students here, and this seems apropos, can you do a quick definition of tenure? Because I don't think that all the undergraduate students know what this is, and this was important multiple times in your remarks.
Who are you saying that to?
Either of you, but you go to it, Chris.
Well, it's just cause firing, meaning you need a cause, and it's a just cause in the sense that other people have agreed before you can terminate someone's employment. And so it's assumed to be indefinite, right? So that it goes for the entirety of your career. But the initial granting of it is through a procedure of evaluation of your sort of probationary period, your assistant professorship period of performance in all of the areas, teaching, research, service, anything else that your university is particularly interested in. Then after you have tenure, you can't be fired unless there's a just cause, like you've stolen money, you've killed somebody, you're a serial harasser, you're racist in ways that have created problems for a number of people that have been accepted by a reviewing body. The important thing is less the content than that there's a review that involves different aspects of the institution, that your tenure needs to be revoked. So it's not a lifetime just free gift, but it comes from a process of review that then grants you just cause status as opposed to at-will firing status where you would just be relieved because somebody's gotten tired of how you're doing your job or disagrees with the content of research or teaching.
Yeah, that's why it originally got extended, or why the early educational reformers and faculty argued for extending it to faculty specifically, is that they wanted to prevent these political firings, right? So that when Mrs. Stanford says, I don't like this economics professor's stance on labor, fire him, then that can't be done outside of all of the colleagues saying, was there a reason for this beyond him doing his job in terms of producing research and teaching in a way that his colleagues who are experts in the field recognize as legitimate. So, if your colleagues look at what you're doing and are just like, this is, incompetent, like this is not what we do here, or like, you have stopped showing up to class, or you were showing up to class drunk every time, no. But if you are pursuing a kind of research that's on the cutting edge and it upsets a lot of people because, for whatever reason, then you can't be fired for that. And that was the point of, as long as your colleagues say, this is legitimate research in our field, and you should be able to do it, and you should be able to disseminate it to students.
Yeah, I mean, the other reason for it that we didn't really talk about, which is more positive, is that it creates a commitment on the part of the individual to the institution and its students and other members of the community. So what that means is that you will spend extra time with student work that needs more attention, needs more help. Whereas if you're an adjunct or contingent faculty person and you're teaching one course at this university, and then you go to Omaha and you teach 2 others, and then you have a 3rd job at a community college where you teach a 4th, and you don't really have an office in any of those places, you don't have time to have office hours, then you're less able to give quality attention to the students at each of those places so that their learning can advance in the way that, as the professional person, you want it to advance. So it was also a way of improving quality, and this is the thing I was saying is counterintuitive for a lot of Americans, but I think it's absolutely true, which is that when you create a commitment, you get better work, get more intelligence, you get more efficiency than if the person is in a precarious situation where they're supposedly going to work harder because they're always afraid of being fired. That's a more negative theory of human nature, and tenure reflects a more positive one, which is create commitment, create relationships, get better work, get better learning, get better research, get more effectiveness over the long run.
Questions? Yes, please, Catherine.
There's a number of us here from the Graduate Student Worker Union, and so I'm wondering if you could speak to the role of unions in protecting academic freedom and kind of fighting this neoliberal takeover of higher education. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, I think that's one of the ways of gaining leverage for fighting for the kinds of things that we're talking about, right? Like improved working conditions, improved commitments to the work that we're doing on campus, that you do with students, that we do with students, that we're all doing in our research. And so, for me, that seems very clearly to be one of the platforms by which we can not only make the case for a better university and fight back against its kind of neoliberalization, but do so in a way that has teeth, and explicitly addresses some of the economic issues that we're highlighting as so disruptive to academic freedom and quality work. And so, to some degree, when you're advocating for those in a union contract, you are fighting for the quality of the education that's offered to students, as well as your working conditions. And so, for me, that seems like an obvious way in which to gain power needed to make changes or be a kind of bulwark against further changes, and be able to provide, like, and one that's backed by a legal clause, right? You know, that it's absolutely required. I mean, it also is a way of further democratizing the workplace, which is part of what unions do in general, and that would certainly be the case here. And so it seems to me like an absolute kind of number one go-to tool in terms of making the case with, you know, inside higher education to address some of the changes that are going on here. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I do agree with that.
Yeah.
I think it's actually an expanding movement, not only in terms of the numbers of universities that are having organizing campaigns happening, but the raising of the expectations in the unionization process so that it also includes instructional conditions, you know, class size, and that kind of thing. So there's a kind of I think tenurability, employment security is the goal that's really in sight, and then attached to that, instructional quality and workplace control issues are also coming along. So it wasn't, I don't think, initially set up to do that, but it's becoming that because it's the main medium by which instructors and researchers can influence academic decisions that have largely been removed from their purview into administered precincts. So that's starting to get reversed, and I'm all for it.
It also provides like a way to just import a lot of current bylaws in universities that are, you know, often designed to provide some of these bulwarks, but then there are significant penalties when people don't know what they are, they're overlooked, or they get ignored in moments of high stress for administrators trying to make decisions under massive public scrutiny. Whereas if they are like legally enshrined in a contract, and there are consequences for doing that, and there's a legal process for arbitrating that dispute. There are grievance officers and a process to actually take on these grievances and get some kind of redress. Outside of that, one needs to work primarily through relationships and soft power, and the traditional governance structures even tend to work that way. That we build on relationships with the administration, and that they build on relationships with us. And I actually think, to some degree, it really benefits when you're in an administrative position. There's never really clear set of rules. This is how you handle this thing. If there's a dispute, we handle it this way, rather than the kind of squishy, difficult kind of maneuvering that happens that's different everywhere in the university to try to make your case. To see what kind of leverage you have for getting that passed through. I think it actually benefits everyone to have just a clearer and legally enforceable set of procedures for handling difficult decisions or resolving disputes or judgment.
Right. We have a question here, Eve.
I just wanted to provide a sort of human case study to underscore what you're saying here, especially for the undergraduates, because I'm an interloper from a different, but also a land-grant university system in Maine. It's not an R1, but it's a land-grant system in Maine. But there, the faculty throughout the system, multiple universities, is represented by under the auspices of the National Education Association, so it is unionized, and so all most important decisions having to do with anything from class size to faculty salaries has to be negotiated through the union representatives with the trustees, and so that has kept at bay I'm not saying that, we're under the same pressure as this system is, but that system would have been way worse adjunctified had it not been for that union representation. And the fight now is for graduate students to be under the same union structure. So that's all.
Yeah. Exactly right.
There's a question up there. No, right, yep.
I want to thank both of you for clarifying the difference between saying what we do professionally is political from saying it's politicized. Okay? Yes, everything we do has the potential to be political. Even if I'm a chemical engineer or an extension educator and I try to explain how solar panels work with people in rural Nebraska, that is political too. That doesn't necessarily mean it's politicized. I do want to play devil's advocate. What if Plan A and Plan B or J are actually not mutually exclusive if this is a false dichotomy? Because it's entirely possible on any given day for all of us to find ourselves doing a part of our jobs that is political. Just to walk around the corner and do another part of our jobs that actually we have to search high and low for it to be political. Thinking out loud here.
I'm not totally, I don't quite follow that last phrase. Can you say more?
So, for example, when I teach whatever gets people's underwear in a bundle, okay, pick a topic. That clearly is political, even if I don't politicize it. If I stay within academic freedom and I do my job properly.
Yeah.
Okay. But then I walk around the corner and a student comes, knocks on my door and wants to have an impromptu conversation because they need emotional support. That's also part of my job. It ain't part of my job description, but it is part of my everyday work life. There isn't a stitch of anything political in it. And yet, if I do it incorrectly, it could cost me my job.
The emotional support part?
Yeah, because I wasn't trained to provide emotional support, but we provide it when requested, of course we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would partially say, I think making a choice to be caring and provide that kind of support, you're making a choice about your time and what you're doing for the job, and that to some degree, is a choice that has political ramifications. But I think in general, I'm not arguing that like 100% of what we do is profoundly political or politicized. And so having moments that, you wouldn't attach a particular politics to doesn't negate the overall point that that the opposite is true out there, and that we tend to be represented, many of us talk about our work as if it were apolitical, and that's what I'm calling out as I think is problematic. That, every time we represent a university as the place where only kind of pure knowledge that has no political bias or implications or ramifications, that somehow like what we do, is always like fact-based, unbiased, neutral in some way, like that. I both not sure that's possible, but I also, I think we need to stop implicitly or explicitly giving that message out there, because then every time, someone looks at any, aspect of someone's work and just says, well, that's clearly political. And so therefore, that's illegitimate. And so it actually enables all of these attacks. We've certainly seen this in our state. I was looking at, some tweet that our former governor put out that highlighted someone at the University of Omaha who talked about how her research and her teaching aligned with her activism. And he just called that out, as scholars, I'm like, oh, well, that's the ideal, where we're supposed to kind of have all these activities kind of feeding into each other in this beautiful synchronous way. And he was able to, fairly successfully, from a rhetorical sense, say, this person is an activist, not a scholar. And so there's this kind of, way in which those become mutually exclusive in the public discourse. And we just provide too many opportunities then for people to point out that that's not really the case. And so that's what I think is a disadvantage. Just, not that, everything we do is political per se, but that we are steeped in politics. And so, in that basic sense of where do we put our resources, why, how much, when. and at what moments do we support some things and not others. And so that, like, that's the long form debate that I see happening here. And I would say that, it doesn't involve, like, necessarily changing the kind of quiet space, or in fact, valuing the kind of long, often solitary or measured kind of back and forth discussion that characterizes scholarly thought, but just takes a long time. Like, we spend a lot of time thinking, or we don't like to spend a lot of time thinking, and reading and experimenting and revising, and all of that makes things slow, and yeah, that translates to a kind of calmness. I wish it were calmer. I feel like the 60 to 70 hours that most faculty now work makes things kind of frantic and eliminates that kind of quiet thought space. But in any case, I'm not necessarily arguing for campuses to become kind of raucous debating sphere or something like that, kind of version of the Sunday talk shows in which we're all yelling at each other.
They could stand to be a little more obvious. But I'm just wondering, on the one hand, I feel like the word political is helpful as a description of primary work, including the care work you just described. On the other hand, just more in the flow of what you were saying, we might be able to destigmatize the concept of the political by applying it basically to everything, which is where you were going, right? Where it is political to advocate for solar panels in this country, and it's political to engage in care work and attend to your students' identity issues, because a lot of people define education as the elimination of identity activity, even though cognitive science shows that your identity and your learning processes are completely interconnected. So it's political of you to do that, and it's political of you just to do the basic teaching that you're doing, because you're believing in knowledge and building and personal enhancement and the growth mindset and all those things which do have a political valence. So I'm wondering if we just defuse the political by just embracing it in the way that you're talking about. Maybe if we really tried that in a sustained way, we could find out how it would work. So just embrace it as just where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, even in a partisan way, like, it's all here. There's clearly conservative, right-wing, libertarian work on campus. There's clearly liberal, left-wing, socialist work on campus. We've got it all. And we always have. And so the fact that political only gets defined as liberal or left-wing, is inaccurate. Like, a lot of what we do contributes to right-wing causes and beliefs.
Mania.
Yes, just to comment on that regarding diffuse. I would rather not diffuse, but confront. More than once a semester, a student will say, well, I'm not political. And I'll say, that's political, let's talk about it. Because I want to say, yes, if you say you're not political, that's a political statement. And then we can talk about it. Or as the one time many years ago where a student said, the book I'm teaching is a communist book. Oh, good, let's put communism on the board and really talk about that word.
Yeah.
So instead of diffuse, I think we need to confront and blow it up, and with humor and with, intellectual discussion.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of the way that the word queer got flipped.
Yep,
Right, so it was an insult that then got embraced.
exactly.
So that this is, isn't that kind of what you're saying? That so the word, and that's what you're saying too. Sorry, I'm just repeating what you're saying. But that I agree with. I would like to see it played out in a consistent way so that we can really judge its effectiveness. We kind of go back and forth between everything is political in this sense, and this is rigor. This is, I was saying this also. There's a rigorous procedure of observation and evidence and argument that we follow. And going back and forth, I think, is really confusing to people.
I will say that I presented some of these ideas in September here in the College of Arts and Sciences Inquire lecture series about the university being a space for debate, and it was covered by the local paper, which I gather has something of a left liberal reputation in the state. It seems to me to be very conservative. But in any case, like this local paper said, like that it seems to be like absolutely obvious point to them, and that, yeah, they agree. Like, let's do that. That seemed like a common sense plan. And so, it was, the piece was covered in extensive, but this is an editorial that got picked up later that, the editors of the paper were like, yeah, that makes sense, let's do that. And so I think it does appeal across the political spectrum, in part because, like, that is what people are calling for, routinely, right? And they feel unrepresented by what's going on at the university, or, and it for people who genuinely feel that way, it can be calming. For those who are making that argument in bad faith, then it diffuses the effectiveness of it.
Yeah. I just want us to combine that with the distinction between what we're doing in propaganda. I mean, we're entering this world where it's, truthiness on steroids, right? And GPT type technology is going to make it even easier to do deep fake everything. And so to have places where we're making those distinctions between what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and what is rational and not rational, and how you observe accurately as opposed to really sloppily and tendentiously and polemically. I feel real pride about being part of that process of making those distinctions. And that is all, I'm happy to own the political label for that. That is my politics, politics of truth. That's what it is. But I don't want to give that up, because there's just this absolutely mesmerizing array of complete nonsense that is inflicted on everyone that we are really trying not to replicate.
As you point out, like, we have all of these really distinctive processes that have been built up in academic culture, across disciplines over many, many years, and there's specific disciplinary procedures as well. And those are unique. You don't find those in the press and social media and governance. One of those things that I highlighted is just, slow. We're slow in things. But, also, detailed care, peer reviewing. I mean, there's just all of those things change the way that our debates happen, right? They're just different. It's a weird space, academic space. And I think, we can make the case that this is a distinctive, yes, this is a space for debate that is akin to debates that happen outside, but that they take place through different procedures and therefore have a differential value in society.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes, maybe that's the last question, I think, and then we sort of have to...
I was just thinking that I think functionally what counts as political is that which poses a threat to people with social power. So it can shift context to context, and that these academic freedom controversies seem to go along historically with assertions that are not simply assertions you can evaluate on their veracity, like a fact assertion, but rather interpretive assertions. So, especially in the humanities, where we often teach things that are theories that are not strictly true-false as far as how we evaluate them, but they have what I would call explanatory power. Does this seem to have explanatory power? And the more factual knowledge you accumulate, the more you can test theories and their robustness, for explanatory power, for like the facts that we all agree upon or that we know are at hand. And I think that because explanatory power is so contingent on positionality as far as whether or not it strikes us as grafted onto a complete worldview, and because positionality is nearly synonymous with identity, when you hear someone assert an interpretive claim that has explanatory power that does not jive with your positionality, it feels like an identity threat. It feels like a threat to a person. And so we see in Nebraska, where the current governor ran on a campaign vilifying critical race theory. This just seems like a perfect case. Here's a theory that is robust. It corresponds nicely with a robust set of facts, but it's an interpretive claim that does not gel with the governor's positionality, and therefore he views it as an identity threat, right? And therefore he responds to academics proposing it, not as people who maybe have more information than him, but as someone who's coming to, steal his farm and go there, with his shotgun. And that's the kind of position we're in, and I wonder, if we focus on trying to disentangle the personal threat reaction that people have to hearing a conflicting explanation, if that's a way to kind of, eventually get towards the dialogue that we want in our classes, or?
Well, you have to acknowledge it, point it out, and work through it, which is one of the reasons why the care work we're talking about is so important. I mean, the university is inherently disrupted because knowledge that's different from what you were brought up with is inherently disruptive. And new knowledge that's different from the old knowledge is inherently disruptive. And it's super unsettling. And people are right to be disturbed. But it doesn't mean that we should back off. And I think that's what you're just talking about with that owning of the political.
And you can model being persuaded too.
Yeah.
Changing minds, being interested in opinions.
And changing your own minds. Oh my God.
Well, that's a good final word, right? So that's the task, changing our own minds also.
No, my final word is pride.
Okay.
I think we should be extremely proud of being involved in education and transmit pride to others and invite them into that. And your title made me think of the phrase dirty college. Our institutions have sinned and are depraved and have made massive errors and continue to make massive errors and to contribute to the wrong things. And yet we redeem them with our ability to change and our ability to discover new truths and our ability to bring them out to people. So my only hesitation is really, does it limit our confidence and our pride in higher learning, not the institution itself, but the process of discovery and transmission and bringing people in and being brought in by other people into higher states of consciousness and understanding. And if we're strong, we're gonna get through this and win people over.
Yeah, I think if we have a clear view of what we have done and are doing, and are not seeking to kind of hide or obscure that, then it gives us a stronger ground for articulating the vision for what we want higher ed to do in society. It gives you permission to reimagine something that you can that you can yearn to move towards. That it is inspiring in the sense of that's where we want to be. And that is not what we're doing here now, but we can get there. Or, or part of that we're doing right now, and we need to be proud of that. So, I do think
Cue the chorus.
Yeah.
Okay, I think here we can stop. Thank you so much. Folks are still out there. I'm sure they are happy to sign if you buy a copy.